Okay, so this feels really weird to say, but a quick disclaimer, when this happened, I was sober, not asleep, and totally in my right mind. I was 18 at the time. It was late August, at around 11 p.m., but I live in Ireland, so it was still pretty much freezing outside. My parents had went to see my uncle over in Scotland because he was sick, and my older sister was staying at a friend's, so I was alone. I wasn't scared though, because although I believed in ghosts, I never thought anything this creepy could happen to me. I had been watching Mean Girls with Lupin, my husky, sitting on my lap, and when the TV just turned off. No lights were on at the time, so I just thought it was the television being annoying. I wasn't scared, but then Lupin started to freak out. He jumped up and started to bite and pull on my sleeve, trying to tug me out of the room. I tried to calm him down, but he wasn't having it, so I just went with it, and he led me to the kitchen at the back of the house. That was when there was a knock on the door. This was really weird. I live in the countryside, and my closest neighbors are about a half a mile down the road, but I guess I wasn't really thinking. I went to leave the kitchen, and Lupin jumped in front of me and started to growl. This was scary. Lupin is the chillest dog ever. He barely even barks, let alone growls, and never at me. I tried speaking loudly to him and pushed by him, but he just started pulling on my sleeve, trying to pull me back into the kitchen. I pushed on, thinking he was just freaked out by the television going out. When I got to the door, I could hear him start whimpering, and as I turned to look at him, I heard a voice coming from outside the door. "Please, miss, we need your help." I really didn't think about it at the time. I just heard a kid's voice, and felt that I had to help. But my door is solid wood. They wouldn't have known I was a girl. I opened the door, and there were two kids that I didn't know, standing shoulder to shoulder. Both were girls, one about 14 or 15, and the other was a lot younger, maybe 7 or 8. But I couldn't see very well because it was dark, and I didn't have the lights on. From what I could see, they were wearing normal clothes, but as I looked down, I saw that they didn't have any shoes on, and it was freezing. I was about to tell them to come in, but then Lupin jumped past me and started growling and barking. He looked possessed, and I was really freaked out. I started to pull him back by the collar and put him in the living room, locking the door behind me. I apologized, but then I stopped. The girls didn't look startled at all. They just stood there not moving. The older of the two said, "Please, let us in, miss. We need to call our mother." This was weird because I couldn't tell where she was from. She didn't have my accent, but it was kind of neutral, and no one I know calls their mom mother. It just seemed odd. I asked her why they didn't have shoes on, and they both just looked at each other and said, "Please, let us in. We need to call our mother." I felt so uneasy. My chest was tight, and I was almost shaking with fear, and I didn't know why. It was then that I finally did something smart. There was a light switch near the door. I hit it, and the light behind me came on, and the world seemed to stop. They had no whites to their eyes, and no iris. Their eyes were just black. I couldn't move. Then, the younger one said, "Let us in, miss." I just slammed the door and locked it, hyperventilating. Lupin was banging against the living room door, trying to be let out, so I ran to it and opened it, and he just threw himself on me, whimpering. The kids were still at the door. The younger one was shouting, "Let us in! We need you to let us in!" I screamed and told them to leave, and they just kept banging. I ran upstairs. I looked out the top window, and the kids had moved to the bottom of the driveway and were looking right at me. I tried to scream, but no noise came out. I ducked down and looked up, maybe 10 seconds later, but they were gone. This scared me even more, not knowing where they were. I called my sister and made her come home. I never saw them again and haven't slept properly since. It's been 2 years. I only found out recently that black-eyed kids are a thing, and I'm not sure if it gives me closure or makes it even more terrifying. This happened when I was about 13 or so. It was summertime, and I was on vacation with my parents. And we had hit the road and driven quite a ways to visit my older sister who lived across the country. After spending time together and sharing supper, we decided to call it a night. My parents slept in my sister's bedroom, and she slept in a neighboring room with her small son. It's important to note a few things at this point. My mother is a round, short woman with very delicate feminine features. She has round glasses, and that night went to bed in a long blue nightgown. My sister, on the other hand, is very tall and athletically built, taking after my dad in regard to her facial features. She too has glasses, but unlike my mother, hers were square-shaped. She went to bed in a shorter, orange-striped nightgown. These small but substantial differences are key. Now, since all the bedrooms were full, I was given a blanket and pillow to sleep on the couch with. Of course, like any kid, I watched TV for a few hours, well into the night. At around 4 a.m., it dawned on me that we had plans for the next day, so I should try and get some rest. After tossing and turning for about an hour or so, I gave up and just laid on my back, staring at the stars visible from the nearby window. As the natural light flooded the room from the sun rising, I flipped through some photo albums. I did this for a while, not having slept at all the entire night. At this point, I was pretty bored and lonely, hoping someone would wake up soon and talk to me. Around 8 a.m., I heard a door slowly open, and someone came out into the hallway. At my sister's house, the living room is sunken in, and a small staircase of maybe 3 steps leads to the raised kitchen and dining room. The hallway is also in this raised area and connects the bathroom and bedrooms. In the living room, there is a doorless archway that leads down to the basement and laundry room. This means that I could look up and see what was going on in the dining room from the couch. This person hummed a little and then was caught off guard by a table in the dining room full of framed pictures of family my sister had on display. I don't know how to describe the way they looked at the photos, besides saying that they were bewildered by them, maybe even enchanted, letting out an occasional oh and ah. I could tell it was a woman, but I wasn't sure if it was my mother or sister. This was strange because, like I said, they looked alike but were also very distinguishable. I also felt this weird feeling because everyone in my family has seen these photos many times, and I'd even say that they probably own a few of those exact same photos, so why act so amazed by them? I said, "Hey, Ma, what are you doing?" in a nervous yet warm voice. No response. Okay, it was my sister. "Hey, good morning. What are you making your dear sibling for breakfast?" No response. Huh. I knew I was definitely loud enough. They had heard me for sure. That uneasy feeling in my stomach grew stronger now, and I had no idea why. The likeness of my sister and mother was there, so it wasn't like a stranger or something. Then, I noticed something very off. They were wearing a knee-length blue and orange striped nightgown. Their height wasn't short, but it wasn't tall either. It was average. They had a muscular build, but could not be called skinny either. The hair was the same color as both my sister and mother's, and so was the skin color. My heart skipped, and I thought, who the hell is this? Maybe someone else stayed overnight? But how could they? I had laid right beside the front door all night. Then they turned around and went to inspect another photograph on a wall. Their face made my heart sink. It was a hybrid of my mother and sister's most discernible features, with glasses that were round at the bottom but squared on the top. Their eyes were not my mother's or sister's. They were very wide and unnerving, and darted all around the walls very quickly, very excitedly. It was as if my mother and sister had been Frankenstein together into one person. My knee-jerk reaction after seeing their face was to scooch my legs in and pretend I was sleeping. I could feel the veins in my neck beating very hard, and my breathing became very loud and labored. Whoever the hell it was came down the stairs and looked around the living room with that same excitement. I don't know how to explain how scared I was as it came closer to me. I thought maybe if I stayed quiet it would pass me. And I was also scratching and pinching myself in case I was asleep without realizing it. The pain was very real. I was definitely awake. I watched with my eyes squinted. The thing took up an interest in a photo album I had left on the table, very close to me. Then, probably the worst thing that could have happened. My sister's portable home phone rang. My sister had answered a call last night and had put the phone on the couch's frame between the wall and its cushions. The thing's face became very alarmed, and it turned in my direction and saw me. And then, it became very, very angry. I opened my eyes and looked at her in her face and just stared back, with my entire body trembling. Its eyes were pure black, total darkness, like two huge pupils staring right at me, and furious. It opens its mouth unnaturally wide and screamed a no at me, and then it turned and darted down the stairs to the basement, where I heard a door slam shut, all the while yelling, "No, no, no." I stared at the archway for a long time, still shaking and digging my nails into my arm, begging to wake up, because I was so afraid it would come back. I was wishing I was just dreaming. I literally could not move, because I was too scared to get up, in case it came back or was waiting at the arch, and I couldn't speak. It was like my brain had abandoned me. An hour must have passed like that, and I didn't move. It had stopped yelling, and this, for whatever reason, was even more scarier to me because, at least when it was yelling, I was sure it was downstairs, and not slowly climbing back up the stairs to fillet me alive. I heard a door open again from the hallways upstairs, and I stared at it, full of adrenaline at this point. It was my mom, exactly herself and in the right nightgown. She was humming as she put on coffee and started making toast. Another door opens, my sister this time, fully as she had looked before heading off to bed. She and my mom talked for a bit, and I just stared at them. My sister eventually saw me staring at them over the banister and yelled, "What the hell? Why are you just staring at me? Why didn't you say anything?" I replied back in a very shaky voice, "I did. Twice." And they looked at each other, confused. I ate breakfast with them and eventually realized that I was awake and really had not slept at any point that night. I decided against my judgment to tell them, in case it came back upstairs. They pretty much laughed at me and told me I'd just fallen asleep and imagined it. My sister told me to go sleep with my nephew and asked me to try to fix something in her room that had fallen out of the windowsill onto the floor during the night. On my way to her room, I walked by that table in the dining room and noticed that all the frames were moved and in different places than last night. I pointed this out very excitedly, like, "See?" And my sister just shrugged it off and said that her son liked looking at them. I kept pressing the issue, and eventually, my sister went to the basement and searched every room just to make me shut up about it. She didn't see anything unusual. I lay down in the bed, but didn't sleep a wink. I still think about it from time to time, and didn't sleep on that couch again, opting instead to sleep on the floor of the room my parents were in, and I locked the door. I've been questioning reality ever since. I've been checking out this BEK phenomena. I've been reading about them a lot lately and have become intrigued, though I never actually believed them. I looked at this kind of stuff as creepypasta and hoaxes involving contacts. I stumbled across this subreddit last night while Googling other stories and was reading some of the stories here when this happened to me. And I had to share this because it was just too fucking real for me. So, last night, I was in my living room reading some stories about BEKs and the real life men in black. Those are worth a read too, if you're into weird UFO conspiracies. It was around 2:30 a.m., and my dog went to the door like he had to go out. I started to get up, and he started growling at the door. He has never growled at anything in his life. Then, my other dog jumped on the couch, trembling and whining. And needless to say, this unnerved me, since I was reading about creepy stuff and was already a little freaked out. So, I just sat back on the couch and held my other dog, trying to calm her down. Then, came a knock on the door. Usually, my dogs go wild, barking and whining excitedly because they love people, but my dog ran away from it and came over to me. At this point, my heart was racing and I was just terrified. All the lights in my house were off and the curtains were drawn. I don't have a peephole, so I peeked out through the blinds of the window behind me that overlooked the porch. There were two boys standing there. One looked to be around maybe 5. He was really little, and the other one was about 10, I'd say. They had their heads down and were wearing winter clothes, heavy jackets. I thought this was weird because it was summer. And then they both turned to look up at me. I don't have a bulb in my porch light, so I couldn't see their faces, but they looked directly at the window. This freaked me out even more, so I moved away from the window and just sat on my couch. And I couldn't believe that this was happening. And I had heard that if you knew about them, then they would visit you. And I just kept trying to convince myself that these were some really young kids playing a prank or something. That this wasn't really happening. However, this felt very real. Then, one of them spoke. It sounded like it may have been the older one. "Ma'am, can you let us in? It's really cold out here, and my brother is hungry." I didn't move. I didn't reply. And I was immediately alarmed because I had no idea how they knew I was female. I just sat there on the couch. The voice sounded void of emotion, and a lot more calmer, and somehow older than the little person talking. What the hell would 2 young kids be doing out at this time of night anyway? Plus, it's June in Alabama. It isn't cold by any means. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, and knew if I opened the door, something awful would happen. And I had read the stories, and I thought, no way I'd answer the door, fuck that. It was really weird though, because no matter how scared I was, and how none of this made sense, I almost felt compelled to go to the door. Like, I had an urge to help them. I suppressed it the best I could, and ignored them anyway. Then, the same voice said, "Ma'am, please let us in. I saw you through the window. I know you're there. It will only take a moment." I was like, okay, what the fuck? A moment? What kid says that? I was frozen in fear and just refused to answer them at all. I waited for them to go away and didn't dare look out my window, and because I just knew they were right next to it and would be staring back at me with pitch black eyes. Then, after a few seconds of silence, they started pounding on my window, and I heard the same voice again. "Let us in. Please, it's cold and we have to call our mom." She will be worried if we don't call her." I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. It sounded just like what happened in all the stories I've been reading. And at this point, I was almost in tears. I was so freaked out. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I still stayed silent and didn't answer the door. I just sat back against the arm of the couch and held my legs up to my chest. There was no way I was answering that fucking door. I stayed that way for about half an hour until I was sure they'd gone and everything was quiet. My dogs, at this point, had ran into my room and I had to go get them out and hold them because I was just terrified and needed some kind of comfort. I never saw their eyes. I have no idea for sure if they were BEKs, but I definitely believe they were. I grabbed my phone and called my friend and woke her up and begged her to come stay the night with me. After I told her what happened, she agreed right away. About 15 minutes later, she still wasn't here. I started to get worried because she only lives on the next street over. It shouldn't have taken her even 5 minutes to get here. Then, I saw headlights in my driveway and looked out the window. I saw her get out of her car and run to my door, and she started banging on it. I let her in immediately, and she was crying. She had this terrified look on her face. She said, "You aren't going to believe this, but I swear to God, I just encountered the 2 kids you told me about." She said that she was at a stop sign, and she checked her phone when this kid knocked on her window. It startled her, so she looked up, and strangely, the streetlights were out and she couldn't see his face. But there was another younger kid behind him. She cracked the window, already apprehensive, and said, "Can I help you?" The kid said, "Give us a ride," in a demanding, overly confident voice for a child. She didn't say anything, and the kid stepped toward her car. And at this point, he was close enough now that she noticed he had jet black eyes. Wall-to-wall black, no white. She said she wanted to drive away immediately, but felt like she was being pulled into a stare, almost opening her door before she snapped out of it and didn't. She gunned the gas pedal and went straight to my house. We stayed up the rest of the night. According to the stories, they usually pay you more than one visit, so I'm going to take a shit ton of melatonin and knock myself out tonight and to try and sleep right through, in case they decide to come again. Whether you believe me or not, this actually happens on Stevens Avenue in 5 Points, right here in Huntsville. Lock your doors and windows, and ignore any child that comes to your door asking for help, especially if it's at night. This encounter is secondhand, but was told to me on multiple occasions by the person that experienced it. I'm a natural skeptic, so I can't say I 100% believe it, but his telling of it is pretty simple and didn't vary between retellings. I've known this guy for many years, and his advice and input on just about everything is well reasoned and always helpful, so I'll just take his word on it, even if with a grain of salt. So let's get down to business. My friend, we'll call him Marv, likes to go solitary camping on occasion, to be one with nature and the things that go along with that. He is also an avid gun collector and enthusiast. I don't remember exactly when he said this took place, but it was a few years back, and he decided to go camping on a whim. He packed his gear, a few guns, a hunting rifle, and a .45 caliber sidearm specifically, and headed out into the country, on a vast property owned by a friend of his. He had full permission in the works. This happened close to Kisatchie National Forest in south central Louisiana. I won't be any more specific other than that. It's safe to say, it's miles and miles of forest and wilderness. He liked to hike in pretty deep and camp at a specific spot he found a few trips prior. So, he made his way in and set up camp in his usual small clearing for the night. It's now late afternoon when he heard leaves crunching and twigs being stepped on. He assumed it was an animal at first and got up from cooking something on the fire to try and get a look. He gazed in the direction of the noise and saw a man approaching through the trees several yards away. He has described his etiquette for dealing with other people in very remote places as always being cautious, as most often, most people he comes across are armed as well. He tries to stay as friendly as possible, but still keeps his guard up, looking for any ulterior motives, as you never can tell what some folks are up to out in the middle of nowhere. He'll make chit-chat with them, find out generally what they're up to if he can, and occasionally share a meal, etc. He's never really met anyone nefarious as of yet, other than this situation. So, one thing that sets off small alarm bells for him is that he knows he's the only one with permission to be on this property. And secondly, this guy's not dressed for the location at all. He said the guy was wearing a white t-shirt, short blue jogging shorts, and white socks and sneakers. Mind you, Marv is miles out in the middle of the woods, away from any paths, roadways, houses, or really anything. Nobody is going to casually stroll into his current location dressed like that, unless they are lost or confused. It was early fall, but not quite cool, very normal for Louisiana. So there's a ton of mosquitoes, ticks, and other insects aplenty. You're definitely not going to have most of your skin exposed in the deep woods if you can help it. I know this all too well from personal experience. So Marv assumes something might be up and calls out, "Hey there, do you need help or something?" Pretty loudly, definitely loud enough to be heard. The guy keeps walking forward, staring directly at him. Marv is starting to get unnerved, and as I said, I know this guy well, and he's cool as a cucumber in a tense situation. Getting more uneasy as the guy is closing the distance, he gets to his feet and loudly declares, "Hey man, can I help you with something or what?" The guy is 15 to 20 feet away from Marv now, is standing at the edge of the clearing in the forest. The guy, looking Marv dead in the eyes, finally speaks and says clearly, "Help me." Marv said that he was already starting to actually get worried at this point, and because he said the way the guy said this was as if something that didn't know exactly how to talk was saying help me, or at least that's what he first thought. It just didn't sound right. The guy, still not moving, says, "Help me." Again, slightly more emphatic, but really just louder. Marv said this is when he picked up on what was truly wrong about this. He said the inflection of the voice was more female and actually sounded like a recording being played back, and the guy's lip and mouth movements weren't matching up with the phrase. It was like he was just opening his mouth, emitting the phrase and closing it again. Marv asked, "What do you need help with?" Not daring to move. The guy, still standing motionless and still looking directly at him, repeated the phrase another 3 times. Marv, now totally unsure what the hell is going on, interrupts the guy. "Alright, you need to fucking go now, unless you actually need my help. Do you need my help or not?" He continued loud and firm. The guy didn't miss a beat and started up with the help me's again, and took another step in Marv's direction. Marv told me that he did the only thing that made sense in the moment, and drew his .45, pointing it at the guy and telling him, "You need to fucking go. I don't care what you want." The guy starts to get more animated and agitated, starting to say the phrase louder now, over and over, but not stepping closer or backing away. Marv did what he thought was right given his current predicament, assuming that He was dealing with an unstable or potentially dangerous individual and discharged a round into the ground in front of the guy. This is where it gets fully batshit crazy, as the guy stops uttering the phrase, goes silent, and still staring at Marv, full-on backflips like gymnasts do, back into the woods and immediately out of sight. Now, I know what you're thinking because I had and still have the same reaction. That sounds like bullshit, but Marv gave no indication of falsehood and told me this multiple times, each time in dead serious demeanor. Marv said that the guy backflipped away effortlessly as if pulled back by an unseen tension coil. He described it as completely humanly unnatural and totally out of place. Marv said he stood there, focused on the forest where the guy had just flipped into, and saw and heard no further movement. It was like the guy had never even been there. He stayed like this as the sun began to set, and the normal night noises crept in. As I mentioned before, Marv is a pretty unshakable fellow, and actually stayed in the area for the night and next night before returning with no further incident. And when he had told me and some other friends about this, of course, we had asked many questions. We asked him to elaborate on the guy's speech sounds. He said the more he thought about it after the incident, the more sure he was that it was definitely a female's voice coming from the guy. It was like he, or it, had heard someone say this and mimicked it like a parrot or other talking bird would, almost like a lure. He doesn't know what it wanted. He, or it didn't give any indication to follow or say anything else. Marv has been back to the property since with no other strange occurrences. The only other minute detail that I can think of is he did remember hearing, during the early morning of the first night, what sounded like a gunshot off in the distance, and it did sound eerily similar to his .45. He thought that he may have heard it again on the hike back out. There are people that hunt in the area, of course, and it could have just been that, but he couldn't be sure. Since this incident, he did some online research of the whole Kissimmee area and found many legends, stories, and supposed encounters dealing with skinwalkers and other unnerving bits of Native American folklore, not to mention mimics and other similar creatures. A lot of his encounter lines up with these tales, but there's nothing tangible to prove it. But even as a skeptic, it does make me wonder about strange things in the remote and untouched areas of our world that can't be explained.